to be here tonight, and we're going to be honoring Leslie Absher and her book, Spy Daughter, Queer Girl, which you'll hear a lot more about tonight. The subline is In Search of Truth and Acceptance in a Family of Secrets. I know everybody's family has secrets, but hers are really something. I want to thank Kelly Ryder's House, Jessica Lowenthal. Thank you so much for setting this up. Allie Katz, Julia Morales, and Andrew Beal, and Andrew and Zachary in the back are running the equipment. So thank you guys for this. And I'm Kitsy Watterson. I teach in the creative writing program and in the Master of Liberal Arts program. And it's my honor to get to know writers in class and out of them. Last summer I taught a writing workshop in Greece, and that's where I met Leslie, who has Greek roots, and you'll hear about them. You want to see? And she's gone to this. It's called the Aegean Writers Circle. You've gone how many times?
I think I've been there 6 years. Six separate
times. Years. And there were all times when I wasn't teaching.
Yeah, and I kept hearing about Kitsy over the years. Like, she's an amazing teacher. Yeah. And then I experienced her amazing teaching. And she just facilitated an amazing workshop that, created the safe space for all of us. So that was really special. And so here I am through our amazing connection at this amazing Kelly Ryder's House.
I want to just tell you guys some biographical information about Leslie. I have my pages numbered. That's not a sure signal. Here it is. It must be here. Yes. Leslie is a journalist and an essayist, and obviously an author as well. Her work has appeared in the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, Huffington Post, Salon, The Independent, Ms. Magazine, Greek Reporter, and the San Francisco Chronicle. She was runner-up for the X.J. Kennedy Award in Rosebud Magazine, as well as runner-up for the Bellevue Literary Review's nonfiction contest. And most recently, we can have applause for this, Spy Daughter was named a finalist for this year's Judy Grand Lesbian Nonfiction Triangle Award for Best Books of the Year.
It's very humbling.
That's not even in her press release yet. She's also an amazing swimmer and athlete. She'd go off in the ocean and I'd sit on the sand and watch. I didn't. It's amazing to me. And she swims in the San Francisco Bay on a regular basis.
No wetsuit, people. You have to work up to that. It took years, yeah. But
Leslie attended Boston University and majored in American Studies with a focus on American history and culture, which came in handy for her life. She received a master's in education from Harvard and taught GED to high school dropouts, and currently teaches writing and study skills to middle school and high school students. She lives in Oakland with her comic book writer, lawyer, wife, Susan,
Yay.
Who's here with her today. So I want to read you just a little bit of praise for this book before we jump into talking. But Ms. Magazine says about this book, Spy Daughter, Queer Girl is succinctly written, gorgeously rendered, and emotionally illuminating. One could describe it as part memoir, part spy thriller, and part mini history of being young and gay in the 1980s. That was Ms. Magazine. And this, I think, is one of the most amazing reviews I've ever heard. This is by, her father was a CIA agent, as you may have guessed. And she's spent years writing this book and researching his life and researching what the CIA did. And this is a former CIA senior intelligence officer and author of Clarity in Crisis Leadership Lessons from the CIA. And he says, a gut-wrenching portrait of a daughter in search of her father's love, affection, and attention, with Greece as a backdrop and the CIA always in the shadows. It is a cautionary tale about the effects of parental neglect and ultimately a long overdue and touching reconciliation between father and daughter. I love the book as a Greek American, a former CIA officer, and the father of a brave LGBTQ activist who may have felt many similar emotions growing up in a CIA family. And I thought that was, I've never read a review quite like that. And a couple more, they're just really good, I think. So you don't get reviews like this every day. A riveting examination of identity and how the people who raise us make us, and how we all must continually remake ourselves. A moving portrait of a father-daughter relationship defined by secrets so big they spanned continents. Absher writes with heart, humor, and the grace that comes with forgiveness, the ultimate mission impossible. And that was by the author, Jessica Pierce Rotondi, author of What We Inherit, A Secret War and a Family's Search for Answers. Okay, and then another one. Without a drop of sentimentality, but with a giant heart and a fresh, assured voice, Absher explores the roles of memory, secrets, and the grief that comes from what we hide and what we leave behind, and what we simply cannot. So, anyway, welcome, Leslie.
Thank you so much for coming, everyone. Taking time out of your evening. I appreciate it. I'm really excited to be here. It's for an author, a debut author, this is a high point to come to Kelly Writer's house and just be in conversation with Kitsy and to just be in this amazing literary ambiance here. So I couldn't be more thrilled, and I've been talking about it for months.
Well, we'll start with some questions. We'll get to know her father through reading this book, but we'll also get to know him from listening to Leslie talk about him tonight and read a prologue. Thinking about having a spy for a father made me wonder, what were some of your best memories about your father when you were a child?
My best memories, some of them are in the book. I guess one of my earliest memories is not necessarily my best one, but it comes to mind, and it sort of encapsulates what he was for me when I was a kid, and that was when we lived in Greece, which was my first home. I arrived there as a baby. We left when I was around 6, and we lived this privileged life, lived in an embassy house, right? My father worked for the agency. I had a nanny. It was this garden of privilege, and I felt, warmly embraced by the Greek culture, and played in my garden and had this beautiful experience. And then every now and then, my father would sort of drift in to my life. And I remember one time I was in the garden, just sort of in the sunshine, having this kind of, beautiful afternoon. And I came upon this man, and he was sunbathing. He was this kind of lounger, and he was just in a bathing suit, and he was sunbathing. And I looked at him, and I didn't know who he was. And I remember this feeling so distinctly, this memory. I went up to him, and and then it came to me suddenly, oh, that's Dad. And it's fascinating to me that even at that early stage, he was already this presence that was drifting away. And that was slipping into the shadows. And, he lived at home. He didn't live somewhere else in those years, but he still was so busy, and he was sort of there and not there. And so that's one of my earliest memories, is this feeling of kind of surprised to see him and to remember that he was there in my life. He was many things, but you asked about the good memory or a fond memory I have. And he was sort of absent a lot. I mean, he lived in my home, but he was always consumed with this war, the Cold War. right? And that was going on in his mind at all times. And so he was a very preoccupied person. And I think that frustrated and confounded me, and I always wanted to understand him better and know what made him tick, right? And so that ignited this pursuit I had that culminated really in this book. But when I was around 7, bad girl that I was, I stole a bunch of things from the grocery store. I stole gum, I stole candy. I was kind of in this rebel phase at 7 years old. And so I stole a bunch of gum, and my mom caught me. And she said, "Where'd you get this gum?" And I lied to her, right? And I said, "Oh, it was in your purse." Completely lied. So she told my dad later. And so my dad, confronted me. I was in the kitchen. I'd come back from swimming in the pool, and he said, "Do you have anything you want to tell me?" And I knew immediately, Mom totally ratted on me. But he was really calm, and he was really receptive. And he was another dad face I hadn't seen before. He wasn't off in a rush to go somewhere. He wasn't preoccupied with whatever it was he was preoccupied with. I had no idea what it was. And he listened to me. And I confessed that I had stolen the gum. And I confessed that I had stolen various other things. And he didn't chastise me. I wasn't in trouble. He listened, and he just said, "That's wrong." And he asked me not to do it again. And it was kind of one of his shining parent moments, and I'll always remember that as this time that, in a way, this is the father I didn't have as much as I would have wanted to. This is the father that was not that available to me because really of what he did. But it was a father, it was under there too. And that's one of the kind of, warming memories I have.
That's wonderful. And just in terms of your family, can you tell us a little more about your mother and father and sister?
Yeah, so both of my parents are from San Antonio, Texas. And we lived there somewhat. I lived there for a couple of years. My mother was a painter. She came from a family of artists. My father came from a family from people from the Midwest. And my father's family was a family of silence. And I'm very dear friends with my uncle, so my father's brother, who is diametrically in opposition to his own brother, right? My father was a spy, and his brother was a poet and a professor in Vermont. So the family really went different ways, but my uncle has told me a lot of stories and what it was like to grow up in their house. And it was this house that really, they just didn't talk about anything. And it wasn't even sort of, risky subjects that were avoided. It was kind of an impropriety to speak. And my uncle has since sort of reflected that his parents, my dad's parents, my grandparents, they hadn't been taught really about the world and how to speak about the world and how to speak about their lives. It was just their culture, but they grew up in a home that was very silent, and where it was just an impropriety to speak, certainly about anything that was controversial. So that was my father's background. My mother grew up sort of in this artist world, the daughter of a painter. Lived a much more kind of outspoken, sort of colorful life. So they met in San Antonio, married just 6 months after they met, and pretty soon after that proceeded to sort of move into their family life. And my father joined the CIA a couple of years after he married. But so my family, sort of southwestern Texas people.
Mm-hmm. Wow. What made you first curious or suspicious? I don't know which is the right word, but what made you wonder? What grabbed your attention or seemed to contradict something?
That's a good question. I sort of feel like it was just sort of in the air where I grew up, in my home, this kind of fog around what does my father do? Where does he go? Who really is he? And I felt that kind of nebulous fog always. But when I was around 10 years old, something kind of instigated me to ask him what he did for a living. He was on his way, off to some place, about, hand on the door, about to leave. And I said, what's your job? And it was just this pressing question that I really needed the answer to. And I don't know what made me ask in that moment. I think it was just sort of, finally I had the courage. And he turned to me and he said, I'm in the Army. And I thought, oh, okay, the Army. I can get behind that. You protect America. You're a soldier. That seems regular. But I had this nagging feeling, but I've never seen you in a uniform. I've never even seen a uniform in your closet. So I think even right away that answer was suspect to me. But I accepted it and it made me proud. And then a few months later, I overheard my father talking to somebody on the phone. And he said, I'm with the State Department. And I thought, that's not what you told me. That was a new story. That was a new cover. And that really messed with me. And I think it was really in that moment when I realized my father's lying to me. He has lied to me. And on a subconscious and conscious level, I can't trust him. And so that was really, I think, when the penny dropped for me. And I think from then on, as a kid in my adolescence, I was always trying to figure him out, catch him. The gotcha moments where I figured out what he really did, or where I won an argument with him, or somehow this kind of battle ensued. But underneath that, I was really just aching to know my father and trying to figure out what made him tick.
Mm-hmm. Did you wonder about his secrets, or did you wonder more about his lying and why? I mean, that might not be a good question.
Well, I feel like when I was a kid, I was more hung up on he wasn't trustworthy. Why didn't he tell me the truth? And as we all have families that have secrets, right? As children, we take on our parents' secrets a lot of the time. So we blame ourselves or we internalize them. So he wasn't telling me the truth. Why was that? Was there something unworthy about me or in me to be told the truth? And so I think that created this sort of complex relationship with him in which I sort of made me uncertain about myself and certainly uncertain about him. And it's not really until I was in my late teens and my 20s when I really became sort of a political being. And that's when I really started to feel that he and I were on opposite sides of the political spectrum. He was a conservative. I was somehow naturally liberal. I don't even know how that happened, from Texas people and a spy father, and it never made sense to me. And so when I sort of started to learn what the CIA did in the world, especially when I started to make Greek American friends, people who would tell me what the CIA was accused of doing in Greece in the years that we lived there, who they were buddies with, right? What they knew about, what they maybe were complicit in doing. As soon as I learned these things, things got harder. And, and my relationship with my father got more estranged. And I think that's when the shame started, when I really studied up and learned what the CIA had been complicit in the coups in different countries, right? Overthrowing democratically elected governments in different places, in Chile and Greece. We all could make a list. And when I learned that, I just felt ashamed. My father was on the wrong side of all of these efforts, of these struggles. And
torture.
Yes, right. And the torture, and so I sort of buried this shame and this fear. Was he involved in that? I concluded that he was. I decided that he was. I sort of blamed him before I even really investigated him. And so I just carried that shame and that sadness for a long time, I would say for quite a few, decades until really I decided that, the only way to sort of move forward in our relationship was for me to really investigate, was for me to really learn, not just walk around with my, presumptions, my assumptions, but, I had to really learn the truth. What did he do? What did he not do? But I always began with this conclusion that he was guilty. And I loved my father. So this was a hard dichotomy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what triggered your deciding to do research and to verify? Was it probably to verify your presumptions? Right.
Right. I think
that's a big move.
Yeah, it is a big to finally to not just kind of lumber along under the weight of it all, right? I think what really started it was I moved to California to be with my wife, and I was looking for a writing group or a writing residency or a workshop, and I had written a small little essay about some of my complex feelings about my father, my complex feelings about the CIA, about Greece, and I took this essay to the workshop, and it was in a Aegean Art Circle, and the teacher was Dorothy Allison, the amazing lesbian novelist and national writer, author of Bastard Out of Carolina, and she was the teacher, and she told all of us to write into our fears. She said, "Your fear is your best friend. Follow it. It will teach you something." And so, I was drinking in this kind of encouragement. You're having hard feelings, you're feeling afraid. Good, follow. And I sat down with her for my one-on-one. You got these 10 minutes with Dorothy Allison. And I gave her my essay, and I had already read it, and she had already looked at it. And I said, is it ready to send out? Is it ready to send to a journal? Is it ready to be published? And she looked at me in her no shit way and said, "Honey, I think it's a book." And I was flabbergasted because I wasn't prepared to do that. I wasn't prepared to spend years and that much blood, sweat, and tears writing into this terrain. So, but she said that, and really, when Dorothy Allison says something like that to you, you cannot go back. I couldn't, but somewhere in there, I think I received her encouragement and her belief, and that's really what started it. So I came back and I started to, I think, with the encouragement and her example, and I was ready.
Right.
Yeah.
Can I ask you to tell the story about how you actually nailed it, that he was in the CIA, and starting with your mom?
Right. Absolutely. So I guess the first time I found out he was in the CIA, or sort of found out, I was 13. We were in the family car going for a Sunday drive. This is something, it's a very 50s white family, and we were still doing it in the 70s. And so we were driving, all the neighborhoods, and my mom would sit in the front, and of course she'd talk about all the nice lawns, and my dad would drive, and it was the normal thing, and I hated it every time we went. Boring. But this time something was different, and the air in the car, the mood felt different. And my mom wasn't talking about the nice, lawns or the pretty trees. And just sort of suddenly, out of the blue, it seemed, she turned to my father and she said, "Michael, tell the girls what you do." And up to that point, this was really a topic we did not discuss. No one brought up the thing we don't bring up. We don't bring it up, and we don't talk about the fact that we don't bring it up, right? So it's this very buried topic, but here was Mom talking about it. And that was really radical. And my father immediately was holding the wheel, driving, and he was really stiffened. And he started to give answers. And he said, "Well, I research things." And my mother, "What kinds of things?" Things about world events. "I manage people," he said. I manage people. And my mother turned to me and my sister, who were in the back seat. My sister's 2 years younger. She was 11. I was 13. And my mother said, girls, do you have any questions for your father and his work managing people? And, there was a fierceness in her voice. I mean, what bravery, right? I loved the nerve in her voice. And so I was like, yeah, I got some questions. And so I said, like, what do the people that you manage do? And he said, they collect information. What kind of information? Information about events. What kind of events? World events. So, we went round and round in circles. And I was giving up because I knew I couldn't beat my dad. I couldn't out-debate him. So I started to give up. My sister and I started to give up. My mom saw this. And so she turned to my dad and she said, you work for the CIA, don't you? There she outed him right there. And he gripped that wheel harder, and he did not answer. He did not confirm it. He did not deny it. And that was a big moment. And I felt all this liberating energy. And we're talking about the thing we're not supposed to talk about. I know what it is. It's a James Bond kind of thing. He's like James Bond. That was my only framework. But I felt this liberating feeling in my chest. We're talking about things. Things in my family are opening up. Maybe, somewhere in there's a little voice saying, maybe I can talk about liking girls. Maybe the girls thing can be liberating too. It just felt good. It all felt really good. And then the next day, and then the next week, and then the next month and year, and we never returned to the conversation. And it just kind of went back to where it lived and where it had lived before, which was the silent place. So that was when I was 13. So then, 14, 15 through adolescence, I wasn't even sure that happened. Did I hear that? Did I mishear that? And during my adolescence, I lost my mother. She died of breast cancer when I was 16. So her example, her nerve was gone. And so it became kind of unreal. And I just doubted it. I didn't even know if I remember that correctly. And it wasn't until I was 20 and home for the summer from college, my junior year, and my father had moved to a military base. And I was, he was picking me up at the airport and he'd taking me to his new house. And we were driving through the Virginia countryside and we arrived at a place in the woods. And I wondered where the hell we were. There was a little guardhouse and a man came out with a clipboard and asked me to get out of the car. And he announced it to me. He said, this is a CIA base. And everyone who lives here for a year, for a summer, for a week must sign this form saying that you will not disclose this.
Oh, wow.
That was it. So that was it. That was a stranger who was telling me. And my father was standing right there, I think kind of relieved that someone else was doing it, because he was so trained not to speak it. So that's when I really found out. I mean, that's when I definitively found out. And a lot of CIA kids, spy kids, that I meet on the road in different capacities, a lot of them were never told, have not been told.
Wow.
It's rare to be told. It's rare to be told. You can have worked for the CIA, retired from the CIA, but never be given official permission to acknowledge that you work there. And that's a process that only the agency can walk you through. And my father did go through that process of having his covers removed, and it's an official, process. And he did go through those steps so that he could then acknowledge he had worked in the CIA, which of course in turn means I could write, my daughter, career girl, because there's no way that I could be as liberated as I am as a writer or really as a person if my father hadn't decided he wanted to go through the process of having his covers removed, So sometimes that just blows me away.
Yeah. Well, we're going to have questions at the end. Is that okay? Or do you want to?
I'm just curious, like, what was it about that day that made your mother want him to tell you? Did she not know?
She definitely knew. She knew. My father said, he told her early in their marriage. And that's a good question that a lot of spouses don't get told. I think that's less true now, right? So my dad joined in 62, so we're talking, these are like 70s, late 70s. Yeah, late 70s, early 80s. I feel like there was some kind of disagreement in the house, maybe. I don't know. But that's just the thing that would have triggered it, right? I think underneath that, the real answer is, I think she was, ground down by carrying the secret, by every place she moved, she didn't have a community that she could be open with. What does your husband do? You have to say something else. You have to move constantly. You don't have a little built-in office of people. So I think the secret, the secrecy, the weight of it, being in a closet, right? Mm-hmm. I think. Pardon me?
The toxicity.
Yes, the toxicity of secrecy and not being yourself and not being open, not living openly. Mm-hmm. I think that's the real answer.
I was just going to ask if there is something you'd like to read, and then we'll go back to more questions. But so they can hear your writing.
Sure,
which
sure.
Is,
I'm happy to do
and
that.
and it'll address one of these areas. We haven't really gotten into your secret life yet,
mm-hmm.
And
that I liked girls.
Yeah.
Well, so I think I'll read the prologue because I just feel like it holds the whole story and it's just a good kind of opener. Prologue, College Station, Texas, 2002. I didn't know what the visit would be like. We hadn't seen each other since I moved to California 4 years earlier. At 67, Dad was still going strong, teaching and consulting, but I wondered if we would ever feel close. We knew so little about each other. Could this visit change any of that? Should I even go? As the day of my flight approached, it became too late to back out. I flew to Texas, rented a car, and drove to the restaurant where we had agreed to meet. The heat hit me like an oven blast as I climbed out of the car. You can do this, I said to myself. It was midday and quiet when I stepped inside. A handful of customers sat at tables beside a bank of windows. I saw my father up ahead. As he talked with the hostess, she kept her focus on him, nodding and grabbing menus without breaking eye contact. "Hi, Dad," I said, coming up from behind. He turned and smiled. The bulky fabric of his navy blue suit jacket bunched under my arms as I reached up for a hug. He looked the same as last time, tall, medium build, hair completely white. We followed the hostess toward the back, passing tables cleared from lunch but not yet reset, and arrived at a booth. I slid in and opened the oversized menu, but couldn't concentrate. "You hungry?" he asked. "A little," I said. The waitress brought water and a basket of tortilla chips, and we ordered enchiladas. Dad turned to the TV over the bar, where a football game played with the sound turned down. I had the feeling that the visit was already slipping away. I shouldn't have come, I thought. This was how all of our visits ended up. I started to shrink into myself. "Is there anything you want to know?" Dad said, jolting me from my retreat. I grabbed the straw from my water glass, pulled it into my lap, and started twisting it between my hands. "Have you ever killed anyone?" If Dad was taken aback by my bluntness, he didn't show it. But then he never did. He tended to stay cool while I sweated it out. "I've made decisions that resulted in the loss of life," he said. Behind the thick lensed glasses, his small, light blue eyes slipped into shadow. I tried to work out what he meant by this. Had he ordered people killed? Passed along information that resulted in someone being assassinated? At 37, I only knew the bare minimum about his missions. That he started working on the Cuban Missile Crisis, got transferred to Greece, and after that, Vietnam. Maybe that's where he made decisions that resulted in the loss of life, as he put it. Or did that happen in Greece? I reminded myself that this was what happened in wars, both overt and covert. People got killed. Still, I was shocked. He wasn't some nameless, faceless spy. He was Dad. My dad. His answer sounded evasive and cagey, and I wanted something real. But bringing up what I especially wanted to know, if he had helped set up the 1967 Greek coup, felt dangerous, riskier even than asking if he'd ever killed anyone. We didn't have a great track record for talking about anything personal, not about his secrets, or mine, or our families. What about Greece? I asked. Dad's hand stopped on its way back from the tortilla basket, a couple of chips clutched between his fingers. What about it? What was the CIA doing there? We were fighting the communists. But didn't we help the Greek military pull off a coup which led to a dictatorship? We had no idea about that. We were focused on other things. He was making it sound like the Greek military and the CIA never crossed paths, as if the colonels, as the dictators came to be called, had arrested and tortured people in some other Greece, not the Greece where we had lived and where he had worked. I've heard horrible stories, I said, recalling what friends had told me. Instances of guns shoved into faces, people dragged from their homes and beaten inside dark cells. My voice wobbled. I pushed the sharp edge of the creased straw deeper into my palm, wishing I had some kind of proof, or at least more information. Were your friends on the ground? Dad popped the chips into his mouth, brushed his fingers together to dust off the salt, and reached for his water glass. I watched a single ice cube slide into his mouth. I had no idea what he meant by on the ground. Was he talking about troops, soldiers on a battlefield? The people who told me stories of torture were friends I had met in my 20s after college. Not soldiers, just citizens. Yes, I said. Well, so was I, and there was none of that. Dad lowered his water glass, subject closed, conversation over. This was what always happened. I sounded lame, and he sounded right. When the food arrived, Dad hunched over his plate to eat. Every now and then he looked over at the television, which was now a shiny black surface. I had other questions, but what was the point? It was 2002, and even though Dad had been retired for over 10 years, it didn't matter. He'd never tell me the truth. Besides, if I kept pushing for answers, I might lose the tiny, anemic shard of a relationship we had. Barely had. And for what? What did I think this would help me understand anyway? I finished my cheesy enchiladas and watched Dad pay the check in silence. I didn't know it then, but my search for answers about my father and our secret CIA life was just beginning. One day I thought I might write about his role, the CIA's role in the Greek coup, a journalist's investigation into history full of dates and facts. At least that's what I thought it would be about, an expose of his guilt, his culpability. I couldn't anticipate the ways it would evolve into a story about secrets, my father's and mine, and that in the end, it wouldn't only be about secrets. It would be about love, too.
It's beautiful.
Thank you.
It's true, too. I'm just going to interrupt for a Cali Writers House announcement that I forgot to give at the beginning, which was that there's going to be food after this, refreshments in the dining room. And there was something else. Oh, books are on sale, and the author will sign them.
Of course.
So that was my catching up announcement. I don't want to stop this flow.
No, that's good.
I had to do my duty.
Yes. Yeah. Please join us. Join us for the reception. That'd be wonderful.
How long did it take you to write this book, Leslie?
Oh, 17 years. A long time, 17 years, probably from Dorothy Allison's pushing me out of the nest to publishing contract. So, yeah, a long time. Yeah.
And just during that time, what were the transition moments for you where you went deeper, or where you felt more satisfied or less satisfied? But what were your transitions? Because it takes a lot to keep working on a book like this, and to do the research and integrate the research and decide what you're going to use, what stories are most important. So,
I mean, I feel like, yes, sometimes I was spinning my wheels and writing that same sentence again and again, but I was always being led, by the great, forces, by the great spirit. I was always deepening. I mean, really, the journey of writing this book, the journey of the 17 years, is the story of me sort of, writing myself into wholeness, basically. And, starting off feeling broken. And no one is broken, but I felt that way. My relationship with my father was broken. I was engulfed in shame about whatever he did. I really needed to heal myself. I needed to find wholeness. And so working on this was this kind of every day that I wrote and interviewed someone or met someone or read something or interviewed my father, I started to come more and more into wholeness. And it was transformative, really. And so I began in this sort of black and white thinking of my father was 100% guilty of everything the CIA has ever done. That's bad. And then I moved through this into this gray area, right, where, not every officer in the CIA is involved in torture. Many are not. Many are doing it. I started to learn the complexity of what he did, the pressures that he was under. I started to cultivate more compassion for him, and also for myself, as I worked on this. So really it opened me up, and it facilitated conversations with my father. And really it allowed us to have ultimately a culminating conversation in which he apologized for ways that he wasn't present as a father. And it was kind of a throwaway little thing he said in a call. But as soon as he said it, that was it. I was, okay, I'm not angry anymore. It just dropped away. It wasn't a conscious decision at all. It just my anger dropped away. And so that was one of the gifts,
that's great.
Of this.
Well, I think this is a good time for you to ask the questions that you've been waiting to ask. And Andrew is bringing around the mic.
Hi there.
Is it on?
On?
Yes.
Oh, it is. One of my favorite moments in the book was when you were at the Aegean Art Circle and you read your essay, and it's all about your dad and the CIA, and then Dorothy Allison says, "I love to read about people that I hate." It really struck me, and I was wondering if you could talk about, A, how you felt in the moment when she said that, and B, how you started reflecting on that moment over time and how you might feel about it over time or even now.
Right. That's a great question. I love that you, that moment struck you. When she said that to me, it was devastating. This was my idol. I had traveled across the world to work with her, and I felt that she was condemning me and my father, and we were all rolled up together. And she kind of, in that moment, she affirmed the shame that I carried, right? Whatever my dad was responsible for, whatever he had done in his career, was my burden also. And I conflated them all, and just felt sort of devastated. And, it was another writer in the workshop who kind of saved me and said, don't be ashamed. You shouldn't be ashamed of your father. That's his business. And she kind of pulled me out of the water. And so that's, that was so early in all of this, and I hadn't, unpacked anything. So So I was pretty devastated that my idol had said that. And, but then she went on to, write a recommendation for me to go to an MFA program. I know that she didn't really, and now I look back and I know that she was, well, that's a cool thing to say to somebody. I love reading books about people I hate. You're onto something. That's I think what she was trying to say in her, no shit way. Mm-hmm. And so I think it was a statement of encouragement, and it also reflected her political position, which I can understand. So, but it was hard. It was hard in the moment.
Hi, thank you for being here and for your courage of putting so much of yourself in print and out there. When I was reading the book, I was interested in some of what you wrote about your relationship with your sister, what was happening at different times with her. And because one scenario would be you were sort of two peas in a pod, you were stuck in this together, but it didn't sound like you were really coming at it as partners in any way. But I'm just wondering if you could share a little bit more of that, and how did she respond to you opening up about the secrets, and are you on the same page, literally,
right,
with her on this topic?
Yeah, when we were adolescents, in teen years, we were peas in a pod. We thought Dad was strange. He was paranoid, always looking in the rearview mirror, competing with every other driver, casing the restaurant we went into. This is before we knew what he did. So we were on the same page. And I think over in our 20s, my sister was so cool when I came out. It was like a non-issue. I'm like, somehow I must have said, I'm going down to the Pride March. You want to come? And, a really courageous way of telling her I was a lesbian. But she was like, oh, yeah, fine, and she was just, a supporter of me. But, I think, and she was also very progressive politically. We always agreed with, each other's worldview. But I think, over time, she got a little bit more protective of my father. And I published a piece, an essay in the LA Times in 2009. That was kind of like the big first thing I said about it all. It was kind of shocked me, but it happened. And my sister, it's the story of the Sunday Drive and how I find out. And my sister, before it ran, said, that I shouldn't publish it, and that my father was in his autumn years, and he was getting old, and that that was hard, that was hard to hear, and I know that I can understand that she was protective of him, and so that was 2009, and since then, she passed away. She died almost 3 years ago, and today is her birthday. So I'm remembering her beauty, and she was an artist, and had a gift that she brought, and a spark that she brought. She was a painter and a glass artist. So she knew I was writing about this book. She told me some stories. She reinforced some memories. And one of the last conversations we had about it, I was complaining, it'll never get published. It's so hard to get published. I was, sort of bitching on a phone call, and she said, of course it will. Why wouldn't it? And that kind of buoyant sister love, had risen back up. So I feel her in my heart, and she, she's happy about it. But there were some times where she didn't want me to tell her story. In the LA Times essay, she said, don't tell my story. And that was a cautionary, I respect it, and that set me like, yes, don't tell her story, don't tell anyone else's story.
Your story.
My story.
That's great.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. It's very surreal to hear your voice because I've been listening to the audiobook, so it's really strange to kind of see you and hear the same voice that's been in my ear for like a couple of weeks. In a really good way, in a really positive way. I mean that in a really lovely way.
Get out of my ear.
in my ear in a really nice way. And I was just interested, particularly related to what you were just saying about that dynamic of kind of telling your story and not anyone else's. It strikes me as like unbelievably courageous what you've done, given the kind of shroud of secrecy that there was growing up, and there must have been ways that that kind of settled itself in you and your kind of subconscious and your approach to your own secrets in your own life. And I just wondered like how you, in the writing and the kind of in the writing process, was there anything that you needed to kind of say to yourself or like affirm to yourself, or like how the kind of the gravity of like breaking your family secrets in such a big way sat with you as you did the writing, and anything you did to overcome that?
Excellent question. I mean, I grappled with terror a lot of the time as I wrote this because, you know, I like to say, you know, my father joined the CIA. It was a job. He had a different job prior. He worked for the city manager's office in San Antonio. He's going to be city government, I guess. And it was a job, right? You sign a job, you get some benefits, it was a decision. But when you're the kid of some kind of intel world or some kind of secret world, whatever it is, you was no choice, was no decision. You weren't, you know, it was just sort of imposed. I just sort of brought up in it. So breaking the secret was just like, I'm not supposed to do that. It would put my father in danger. It's just in my bones. I'm not supposed to do it. I couldn't even really, you know, separate it out for a lot of the time. I just felt terror. So therapy is a very good thing. And, you know, having a loving partner who's in the room is a very good thing. I used as many tools as I could. You know, I had writing group, peers helping me. I went to an MFA school. I had friends. I swam. I had a lot of support. I worked with a therapist, you know. And I just told myself as I wrote, I kept telling myself, I never believed it, but I told myself anyway, you're just writing it down for yourself right now, you know. And I gave myself permission like that, you know, like you can change it later, you can, you know, but that's very true because by the time it arrived here to where you've read it, it's gone through a lot of changes and it's ready, you know. So there was some kind of belief that it would come together, that I could find a way to tell my story that wouldn't devastate everybody else, in, you know, where we'd all arrive inside my heart in wholeness. I believed that, or I struggled to believe that, and I worked toward that, and I hoped that that would be what happened. Yeah, and then I just kept, you know, trying to get support around it. Yeah, great question.
I haven't read your book, but I can't wait. I can't wait. I'm so glad, you know, thank you, Kitsy, for getting me here. I wonder if we swam at the same pool in Oakland, because I lived there.
Where did you swim?
Well, it was down in Temescal.
Temescal. Sure.
We swam in the
I
same
swim
pool.
there. It's a really cool pool, outdoor pool.
I lived there for
Public
13
Oakland
years.
pool. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I'm just so touched by how much we have in common. I was a parish priest in 1972, 73, when the Chilean coup happened. And I took my youth group to a concert of a wonderful music group, Chilean music group, who were outside of Chile when it happened, so they were in exile. And a week after that, 3 of my youth group members were taken out of my youth group because my church was in McLean, Virginia. I haven't been arrested more than 2 times, unfortunately. But the first time was at the CIA.
Was that the CIA?
I was arrested at the CIA.
At Langley headquarters?
Yeah. Because my church was in McLean.
Okay.
Which is next door to Langley.
What was the demonstration, or what was the...
It was, it would have been 70, it was, when was that? That was in the 80s probably. It would have been Central America stuff. Yeah. So I'm hungry to read your book and to share more stories with you, but...
Cool. Yeah, let's do
So
that.
glad that I'm here.
Thank you.
So I have a question, though. Can you just talk a little bit more about coming out to your father? What was that like? I also had a sort of an absentee father and a different story, but what was that like?
That was pretty fraught. I mean, I came out to him officially in a letter when I was 26. And he called me when he got the letter, and he said, it's not natural, and I can't accept it. And I just thought, you're lame again. But he said, in his inimitable way, but we don't need to lose contact. I don't know. There's so many ways to look at that, kind of wanting your cake and eating it too, right? But then he also didn't want to lose connection.
Right.
So, and I just thought, he disappointed me, and it was lame, and we're still estranged, Dad, and we had some other conversation, and I said, I wish we were close. And he said, you don't think we're close? And I said, no. So that's kind of where he was in my 20s. And, ensuing decades, 30s, 40s, I would see him from time to time. There was, when Susan and I had a commitment ceremony before it was legal, before same-sex marriage, he was invited but didn't go. I forced a visit with Susan. We visited him in San Antonio where he was living. He was in the midst of selling and buying a house, so he kept trying not to meet. And I sort of emotionally blackmailed him, and said, you're going to really damage our relationship if you don't meet. And he met with us, but it wasn't, a joyful choice. So it really wasn't very good all these years, and it really wasn't until in his 70s. So he didn't come to the commitment ceremony. I can't accept it. It's not natural. Lots of distance, lots of not acknowledging Susan when we go to visit that one time, and, Christmas cards that don't mention her and things like that, and would get angry. And but then something, in his 70s, he's shifted. I don't know what caused it. And Susan and I were in Texas. We went to Texas to a cousin's wedding, and I reached out to Dad, and I said, we're going to be 30, an hour away. Do you want to visit? Do you want to see each other? And he said, sure. And I was kind of surprised. And so we drove, to his, he was teaching at the Bush School of Government at Texas A&M. And so we drove to his part of the world there, and he met us on the shoulder of the highway. It was kind of like this 007 moment, I'll be in this car, I'll be here, pull in behind me, and I think, we have GPS, Dad, but we can do it the spy way. And we pulled up behind him, and then we pulled off the shoulder of the road, and then he took us to the Marriott or to whatever restaurant, whatever hotel it was, and paid for a room for Susan and I, because they didn't have a space in their house. And so, he waited in the car in the parking lot while Susan and I wheeled our bags to the room, and we were going to then go in one car to his house. And when we opened the door in the room, Susan just said, wow. And I followed where she was looking, and there was a king-size bed, a single bed in the room.
Yeah. Good for you.
And that says it all, right?
Yeah.
So,
Acceptance.
so that was a beautiful gift toward the end from him.
I think that we can stop here unless somebody has one last question.
Hi. Just making sure you can hear through
Yes,
this
I
thing.
can. Yeah.
I guess it's more as an observation than even a question, because I think she kind of asked the question already. But I was really struck when you were talking about growing up, and you kept using the word fog, and it was a fog, and then I'm picturing you in Oakland. And I just have this idea that you externalized the fog. That you could, it made me wonder what other structures, like physical structures you created that supported you in this growth process, that helped move things out so you could, it's like your internal space got safe or something. And so I was going to ask about that, and you asked that lovely question already about what structures supported you, because 17 years of
processing really hard trauma. So I'm admiring that and just noticing more than anything.
Thank you. Yeah, now the fog is outside of. Now it's the weather now. But that's a really great deep question, and I feel like the next thing that I will be working on, I think, is more, reflective memoir writing, probably about losing my sister, getting and then going into remission for cancer, other life journeys that I have had, in which swimming and the waves of the bay and have somehow been the structure that has let me or helped me be with some of these other journeys. So something about waves and swimming and the bay and the cold and moving through life, right? Writing it, letting it wash over. Something about that has something to do with your question.
The fog.
Yeah, and the fog.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank Leslie, and before we part, I want to make sure everybody can go in and have some refreshments that the young writers have put together for us. So, but thank you so much, Leslie.
Thank you,
This is
Kitsy.
beautiful.
Thank you. This is amazing. Thank you.
And I'm assuming that you are available to sign books.
Absolutely. And
Okay.
chat and, absolutely.
Thank you.
All right, great.
Thanks again.
Here is
Oh, thank you.